The clock's hands crept closer to midnight, a soft ticking that echoed in the quiet of the Central Hospital's hallways as Martha Sullivan wrapped up yet another grueling shift. The hospital, usually bustling with activity, was starting to quiet down. As the last of the patients were discharged and the late-night staff took over, Martha stood in the bustling but dimly lit break room, running her hands over her face. Her eyes burned from the exhaustion of the past 16 hours, a routine that had become all too familiar in the past 6 months. At 65, Martha was considered one of the hospital's finest cardiologists. Her decades of experience, countless lives saved, and the respect of her colleagues made her a pillar in the medical community. Yet, despite all her achievements, her heart felt hollow now. Since the death of her husband Roger, her once-driven spirit had been dulled. Work, which had once been a calling, had transformed into a shield, a distraction from the overwhelming silence that consumed her home since Roger's passing. Her identity, once tied to being a mother, a wife, and a doctor, now felt lost in the empty space he left behind. Each day was a blur of patients, surgeries, and meetings, and yet it seemed to be never enough. She clung to her work like a life raft, but it was becoming increasingly apparent that even the most prestigious career could not replace the companionship and warmth that Roger had brought into her life. She had spent the last several months avoiding going home. The emptiness of her apartment, the once welcoming space she had shared with her late husband, now seemed oppressive, suffocating even. Martha had spent years talking about slowing down with Roger once their children were grown, planning their retirement where they would travel together, relax, and live a quiet life in the countryside. But those plans had been shattered in an instant when Roger passed away. The promises of a peaceful retirement felt more like a cruel joke now. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, the weight of her fatigue became undeniable. Her legs felt as if they were made of lead. She walked through the hospital's corridors with slow, deliberate steps, each one heavier than the last. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few on-call doctors' cars scattered around. The night air felt sharp against her skin as she headed toward her car, the cold bite of it a fleeting reminder that the world outside still kept turning, despite everything she had lost. Martha reached her car, but before she could even unlock the door, dizziness swept over her like a wave. The lights in the parking lot swirled in a dizzying spiral, blurring into one bright, hazy mass. She tried to steady herself by gripping the side of her car, but it felt like the ground was slipping beneath her feet. Her head spun, and the world seemed to tilt with an unbearable intensity. She staggered for a moment, her breath coming in short gasps, but it was no use. Her vision darkened at the edges, and with a final, helpless motion, Martha collapsed into the cold concrete below. The last thing she remembered before everything went black was the bright, silvery moonlight filtering through the passing clouds above. A faint voice, soft but unmistakably familiar, cut through the blackness. "Martha? Can you hear me?" Dr. Elena, her longtime colleague, was standing beside her. Slowly, Martha's eyelids fluttered open. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, and for a moment she had no idea where she was. The white walls and the soft beeping of a heart monitor near her head felt strangely alien. Her body felt heavy and sore, as if she had been hit by a truck. Elena's voice brought her back to reality. "You're in the hospital, Martha," Elena explained in a calm tone. "You collapsed in the parking lot. Extreme exhaustion, dehydration, high blood pressure. Your body's been telling you for a while that it needs rest." Martha blinked several times, trying to focus. Her mouth was dry, and her throat felt tight with the aftertaste of fear. She tried to push herself up to sit upright, but Elena gently stopped her with a firm hand on her shoulder. "Don't even think about it," Elena said softly. "You'll be under observation for at least 48 hours. We've already contacted your children." The mention of her children, Lawrence and Audrey, hit Martha like a wave. A rush of guilt flooded her chest. Since Roger's funeral, she had grown more and more distant from them. She had avoided their calls, failed to show up for family dinners, and had neglected the Sunday lunches they used to share together. Every missed call felt like an additional weight pressing down on her heart. Her children had always been there for her. Why was she shutting them out now? Hours passed in a blur of medical checks and tests. When her children arrived, the concern was evident on their faces. Audrey, ever the more compassionate of the two, sat beside her mother, holding her wrinkled hand in both of hers. "Mom, you can't keep doing this," Audrey said, her voice a mixture of frustration and care. "You and Dad always talked about slowing down, enjoying life after all these years of taking care of others. And now ... you're working yourself to death." Martha's heart clenched at Audrey's words. The pain of losing Roger had driven her to immerse herself in work, but now she saw the cost her children were suffering too. "Work is all I have left," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. "It's the only thing that keeps me from breaking." Lawrence, ever the more pragmatic of the two, approached from the other side of the bed, his face hard with a mixture of concern and resolve. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I respect your pain. We miss him too. But Dad would never want you to do this to yourself. He'd want you to heal." Martha's eyes filled with tears as she heard her son's words. She hadn't even realized how much of herself she'd lost in her grief. 3 days later, Martha was discharged from the hospital with a strict order from her doctors. She needed at least 3 months of rest before returning to work. The hospital director, who had known both Martha and Roger for years, insisted that she focus on grieving or she would never be able to return to her normal life. She had become a stranger to herself, lost in the whirlwind of her emotions, and now it was time for her to find a way back. But how? The days following Martha's release from the hospital were a blur of doctor's appointments, endless cups of tea, and a persistent sense of guilt that gnawed at her every step. The thought of returning to her apartment was unbearable. It was a place where every corner held memories of Roger, the laughter they shared, the meals they prepared together, the quiet evenings spent reading in their favorite chairs. But now, it felt more like a tomb than a home. At the suggestion of her children, Martha decided to take some time away from the sterile white walls of the hospital and focus on her recovery. Still, the idea of facing Roger's absence head-on made her stomach churn. She knew she had to return to the apartment. She could not avoid it forever. So, one morning, as the sunlight streamed gently through her bedroom window, Martha made a decision. She would confront the past one painful step at a time. Her first stop was the master bedroom. As she entered, the left side of the bed remained untouched. Roger's pillow, always positioned just right, still rested in the exact spot where he had left it, untouched for months. The sheets, though no longer holding his scent, were still arranged as if waiting for him to return. Martha stood there for a moment, allowing herself to breathe in the stillness of the room. The quiet was deafening, and in that silence, the memories of their life together seemed to crowd in around her. She had long stopped allowing herself to cry, but standing there, in the place that had once felt like home, the tears began to well in her eyes. Her gaze shifted to the closet, and slowly she walked toward it. The oak wardrobe doors creaked softly as she opened them, revealing the neat rows of Roger's clothes. He had always been meticulous about keeping everything in order, his suits, shirts, and shoes aligned in perfect symmetry. It had been one of his many charming quirks, a trait that had balanced out Martha's tendency toward chaos. The contrast between their wardrobes had always amused her, but now it seemed like a cruel reminder of everything that had been lost. As Martha began sorting through his clothes. She found herself paused by each item, unable to move past it without a wave of memories crashing over her. She held up his navy blue tie, the one he had worn at their son Lawrence's wedding. The simple act of folding it brought back images of that joyful day, the laughter of their family, the pride she had felt seeing Lawrence standing at the altar with his bride. Then there was the wool sweater Roger had bought on their trip to Scotland, a week spent in a remote cabin under a blanket of stars. It had been one of their last truly carefree vacations together, and now that sweater felt like a relic from another life. But when Martha reached Roger's brown tweed coat, everything stopped. It was his favorite coat, the one he wore for special occasions, the one that had become synonymous with their shared life. It was a gift from Martha on their 20th wedding anniversary, a gift he had treasured. The coat, although aged with time, seemed to hold the essence of their love. Martha held it against her chest, feeling a sudden surge of grief. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry loud, wrenching sobs that echoed through the empty apartment. In the depths of her sorrow, Martha noticed something unexpected. A small brass key fell from one of the coat pockets, along with a folded piece of paper. Confused, she picked it up, unfolding the paper with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably Roger's. Acacia Street, 278. The address meant nothing to Martha, and the key seemed out of place. Roger had never mentioned anything about a new house or a hidden project. She stood there, staring at the key and address, trying to make sense of it. Then, like a sudden bolt of lightning, a memory hit her. Roger's voice, excited, brimming with enthusiasm, calling her on the morning before his sudden death. "I have a surprise for you, my love. Something we've been talking about for years. I can't wait to show you when you get home." Martha's heart sank as she remembered those last words. That was the day Roger had passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. She had rushed home, only to find him collapsed in the kitchen, and the surprise he had spoken of was forgotten in the chaos of grief. She never thought to look for it, to follow up on what Roger had so eagerly anticipated sharing with her. Now, here it was, this mysterious key, and the address she didn't recognize. What had Roger been planning? That evening, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that this was important, that this was a message Roger had left for her. She decided that she would find out what the key unlocked. Her children, unaware of the discovery, continued to be concerned about her health, urging her to take it easy. But Martha knew she needed to do this. She needed to understand what Roger had wanted to show her. The following morning, after a restless night, she set out on a journey. The key, now tucked into her purse, felt like a lifeline, pulling her away from the confines of her grief and toward something unknown. Martha dressed carefully, donning a light blue blouse that Roger had always said matched her eyes. She applied a light lipstick and combed her gray hair into a neat bun, trying to present herself in a way that felt like the woman she used to be. With a sense of determination, she drove through the city, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. What could Roger have planned? Maybe it was something as simple as a surprise dinner reservation, or perhaps something far more significant. Roger had always been a romantic, always planning little surprises for her, even after all these years of marriage. But nothing had prepared her for what lay ahead. Martha sat motionless in the dim living room, surrounded by the echoes of her grief. The sun had set, and the shadows in the house grew longer, almost as though the walls were absorbing her sorrow. The room seemed to be alive with Roger's presence. Quiet hum of the clock on the wall, the faint scent of his favorite aftershave lingering in the corners of the house. His last letter sat in her hands, the words heavy with love, hope, and the promise of a future they would never share together. For the first time in months, Martha allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loss. She had been running from it, hiding behind the endless work, the long shifts at the hospital. But here, in this house, surrounded by the memories of the life they had once planned, she couldn't escape it anymore. Roger was gone. The life they had dreamed of together, the quiet moments in the garden, the gentle conversations on the porch, all of it was just gone. Yet, in the midst of that overwhelming grief, something began to stir in Martha. It was a quiet, faint whisper, deep inside her, urging her to see beyond the sadness. Roger's letter spoke of a future that was still waiting for her, even if he couldn't be there to experience it with her. He had known, in his own way, that she would need to find her way out of the darkness. And now she understood this. House wasn't just a final gift from him. It was a symbol of a new beginning, a chance for her to rediscover the life she had lost. Martha stood up, the letter still clutched in her hand. She moved slowly toward the window, looking out at the garden that Roger had dreamed of cultivating with her. The last rays of sunlight reflected off the dewdrops on the flowers, and for a brief moment, the garden seemed to shimmer with the potential of new life. She felt the weight of the past months lift, just a little, as she looked out at the vibrant world outside. The birds still sang in the trees, the wind still rustled the leaves, and life, despite everything, still went on. The next morning Martha woke early. The house was quiet, save for the soft creaking of the old wood as the house settled. It was a strange kind of silence, one that was both comforting and unfamiliar. She could hear the distant chirping of birds, the sound of wind rustling through the trees outside. The air felt crisp, the first true breath of autumn seeping in through the windows. She dressed carefully in one of the blouses Roger had always said complimented her eyes, light blue, soft and soothing. It was the same blouse she had worn when they first visited this area together years ago. She applied a light touch of lipstick, brushed her hair into its usual neat bun, and looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time in months, she didn't see the tired, hollow woman who had been swallowed by grief. She saw a woman with purpose, a woman who had been given a second chance, a woman who was ready to honor the life she still had left. Martha's first task of the day was simple. She stepped into the garden, kneeled down in the rich soil, and began to tend to the neglected flowers. The garden, once full of promise, was now in need of care. It had been Roger's dream, but now it was hers too. She picked up the tools he had used, his gardening gloves still in the shed, and started trimming the overgrown bush, clearing the weeds. Slowly, the garden began to take shape. It was a metaphor for her own life. She had to clear away the weeds of grief, let the sun shine through, and allow new growth to emerge. Later that day, as Martha worked, the sound of her children's laughter echoed in from the driveway. Lawrence and Audrey had come for their weekly visit, bringing their families with them. The house, once cold and empty, now seemed alive with the sound of children running through the garden, playing with the new dog they had brought. The large dining table, which had once sat untouched, was now surrounded by the people she loved most. The conversations flowed, filled with warmth and laughter. Martha watched, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, as her grandchildren ran through the house, their voices ringing with life. She felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. Roger had always wanted this. He had wanted them to embrace the life they had left. He had wanted them to live, to grow old together in the garden they had always dreamed of. And now, in his absence, she was doing just that. She wasn't living in the past anymore, clinging to the memories of what they had lost. She was honoring those memories by building something new. As the months passed, Martha found herself embracing this new life, piece by piece. The house became a reflection of her own transformation. She restored the garden, planted new flowers, and even began to grow vegetables. Each day, she spent a little more time in the garden, learning the subtle art of pruning roses, transplanting seedlings and tending to the soil. Her hands, once accustomed to the precision of surgery, now became gentle and nurturing as she learned the delicate balance needed to care for the earth. Martha also began volunteering a few times a week, offering her expertise in cardiology to a local clinic. She didn't fully abandon medicine after all. It had been her life's work. But now she had found a balance. She no longer worked herself to the brink of exhaustion. Instead, she took her time, savoring each moment, finding fulfillment in both her professional life and her newfound peace. It was on a quiet spring afternoon, nearly a year after she had found the key in Roger's coat pocket, that Martha sat once more in the garden, her hands covered in soil as she planted tulips along the driveway. Audrey approached, her voice soft with concern. "You know, Mom, I was so worried about you after Dad passed away," she said, sitting down beside her on the grass. "You seem to have given up on living." Martha looked up from her work, her face softening as she looked at her daughter. "For a while I really did," she admitted, wiping her brow. "But Roger, even though he's no longer here, found a way to remind me that there is still life to be lived." Her heart swelled with love as she thought of Roger. He had given her this house, this garden, and the chance to find her way back to life. He had prepared the key to her future, even when he could no longer be part of it. That night, as the house settled into quiet again, Martha sat on the porch, wrapped in Roger's old tweed coat. The weight of it was comforting now, no longer a burden of sorrow. The wind chime that had hung on the porch for years chimed softly, its delicate melody echoing in the cool evening air. The stars twinkled above her, and for the first time in a long while, Martha felt at peace. "Thank you for the key, my love," she whispered into the night, the words carried away by the breeze. "Not just for this house, but for my new beginning." And with that, Martha finally understood. There was a time for everything, a time to mourn, a time to heal, and a time to live again. As the stars watched over her, she was ready for her new purpose,